It's Ken Rutkowski, voice of disruption. This interview is all around the idea of how to actually make yourself a better person and being in mostly a non-cognitive state. You know, you're out, you're cold. How do you do that? Well, it's called sleep, and most people don't really realize, but that's one of the most important times to better yourself. And Dr. Michael Breus knows this quite well. You are known as a sleep doctor.
I am the sleep doctor.
Got a couple of books on this. Matter of fact, your most recent book right here, The Power of When. Sleep is something most of us don't realize is so important.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing because sleep affects every organ system, every disease state. New research comes out literally every single month about what is cool and new and interesting about sleep. And we keep learning more and more.
Why is it when we close our eyes, nothing really happens, but when we actually go into a sleep state, something does happen? Does that make sense?
So yeah, well, actually, there is something that happens when we close our eyes. Our brain will start to slow down a bit and move into what's called an alpha state. And then from there, we actually move on into sleep. So there's sort of a transition period that has a tendency to occur. Of course, many people will meditate with their eyes closed as they're going to sleep. So they can get some good stuff from that as well.
But you have to physically go into the beta?
Yeah, so you have to actually get into a state that we call stage 1 or stage 2 sleep. It's got a couple of different aspects to it, but pretty much it's that you feel falling, like, and then boom, you're in.
Okay, and what should be the right amount of time, or is it different for everybody?
It's absolutely different for everybody. So I'm the sleep doctor, and I sleep about 6.5 hours a night. I go to bed at midnight, I wake up at 6:30. 8 hours is a myth. So if we're talking disruption here, there's a lot of sleep myths out there that we can go through, but 8 hours isn't necessarily what everybody needs. So as an example, and by the way, that's genetically predetermined. So if you've never been a big sleeper and you've always slept 6 hours, if you wake up and you feel refreshed, ready to meet the day, got good energy, you're good to go.
So you shouldn't try to fall back asleep.
Well, and that's where it gets weird. So if you tried to fall back asleep, let's say, we'll take me for example, 6.5 hour sleeper. If I try to fall back asleep, and I do, I wake up groggy and logy and I feel like crap. So it's really, when your body naturally wakes you up, that's probably the best time to get up.
And like, for example, I need 3 to 4 hours of sleep. It sounds ridiculous, but you told me that's a rarity. But if I feel good with that, keep going with it, right?
Yeah, and so here's what's interesting, like if we looked at 3 to 4 hours of sleep. So while that is very, very rare, so folks out there don't think, hey, I can be like Ken, but what we can see is that's probably roughly 2 full sleep cycles. Average sleep cycle runs about anywhere from 90 to 120 minutes. So if you sleep for 4 hours, you're getting 2 big chunks. And if I took a look at your sleep, my guess would be that in that first chunk, we would see that physical restoration, which is from stage 3, 4 sleep. And in the second chunk, we'd see more REM sleep, which is the mental restoration.
Okay, now I know from what you told me in the past, you don't really have the most optimal sleep environment at your house.
Correct.
You got dogs, TVs, you have things that are just complete distractions.
Let me tell you what goes on in our house. So it's me, then it's the French Bulldog, then it's the Chihuahua, then my wife, and then a cat. Occasionally a child might even come in. We got a big screen TV and it's going almost all night long. I'm the sleep doctor.
Why do you do that?
Right? Because we're adaptive, right? We're all adaptive creatures, and that's what works for us. You know, I can tell you honestly that if my wife doesn't have her animals around, she doesn't sleep nearly as well. So you got to remember, not all those rules that are out there are really for everyone. And also, by the way, the television is a big point of contention for a lot of people. TV is okay to fall asleep to. Think about it like this. Most people, when they're falling asleep, they're not actually watching TV, they're listening. Right? So their eyes are closed and they're kind of listening out of what I say, the corner of their ear. And it's just enough of a distraction to prevent people from thinking about the things that would keep them up.
Okay.
And by the way, 99% of televisions out there have got TV timers built into their software, so just turn on the timer and click it off a couple hours later and you're good to go.
What's your thought on light?
Light is a major factor. I believe that not only, just like there's junk food, there's junk light, right? And so when you look at light, here's what's really interesting. Specifically, blue light has a dramatic effect on our sleep. So it might be okay to watch a television, which is all the way across the room, but if you pull your phone out and you're checking Facebook, or you're trying to, watch Game of Thrones on your iPad or get your high score on Candy Crush, you've got a direct blue light that's going into the eyes. About 10 years ago, scientists discovered that in our eyes, we have these special cells called melanopsin cells, and they trigger only with this blue light, which is about 450 to 480 nanometers. When it hits that, it turns the melatonin faucet off in our brain. Well, we kind of need, melatonin's kind of that key that starts the engine for sleep, so we don't want to be turning that off right before bed.
But melatonin itself, taking melatonin, especially as a child, it's quite bad for you, isn't it?
Not a good idea. So melatonin is a hormone. People don't know that, but you know what? You wouldn't go down to the local health store, and get testosterone or estrogen or something like that. So you really need to think about what you're going to be doing there. Also, most melatonin these days is sold in an overdosage format. The appropriate dose is between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams.
Wow.
It's mostly in 3, 5, even 10. And it's really not great for kids because at high dosages, we actually learned that melatonin is a contraceptive.
What?
Yeah. So here's the problem is I can't think of anything worse for a young female developing body than to introduce a contraceptive at that age. Bad idea. Anybody under the age of 18, no melatonin.
Quite frankly, your bedroom sounds like a contraceptive. With all the TVs and dogs, it sounds crazy. Why did you get into this? Why this field?
You know, I'll tell you, it was really interesting. During my residency, my first rotation was in sleep. And by the third day, I absolutely fell in love with clinical sleep medicine. You know, I got to be honest with you, Ken, I help people fast. My wife often says, you got to slow down and stop helping people so quickly because you need to get more patients. It's pretty funny, but when we look at insomnia or apnea or narcolepsy, I can identify things in people. Sometimes I help people within 24 hours sleep better. Being able to have that kind of gift as your career, it's really pretty cool.
It is, but some of those things you make them change. Is it the bed? Is it the environment? Is it what they eat?
It can actually be all of those. I actually do all types of consults for people. I can't count the number of people who are like, hey, Dr. Breus, how do I pick a new mattress? Because that's not an easy process at all. I've got people who say, hey, can you evaluate my overall bedroom environment? We look at light, sound. I kind of think of the 5 senses. So we look at light, sound, touch, taste, and smell. So taste, of course, is nutrition. What are you eating before bed? How can that have an effect? When was your last caffeine intake, alcohol, cannabis, whatever it happens to be? I need to know all that stuff so I can help guide you to get you to the right point.
And people that are doing CBDs before going to bed, does it help, or is it, again, a certain amount?
So it's really interesting. This is brand new kind of data. The Department of, I think it was the National Science Foundation came out with a consensus report specifically looking at cannabis and sleep. It's pretty interesting what we discovered. So number one, we know that CBD, which is kind of the constituent of cannabis, non-THC version, really helps reduce inflammation. So if you've got joint pain, back pain, any of those kind of things, that could be big. Also, there's other kind of inflammation, not the kind of think about when we're exercising, but there's gut inflammation, right? Our microbiome, and how does all of that biology affect our sleep? It does quite a bit, and so CBD looks like it can be very, very helpful. It's not for everyone, though, so you definitely want to talk with your doctor about it before you try to use CBD, but generally speaking, CBD without the THC is pretty safe stuff.
So let's give them a secret weapon. An entrepreneur out there is getting tired. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
I got one.
I know you do. What's it called?
It's called the Napa Latte.
What's a Napa Latte?
So here's what I have people do is you go out and you get a cup of drip black coffee. Put in a couple ice cubes just to cool it down. You slug it, and then immediately after, you take a 25-minute nap. The reason this works is the reason we get sleepy is because there's a buildup in our brain of this stuff called adenosine. If you look at the molecular structure of adenosine and the molecular structure of caffeine, they're off by 1 molecule.
Wow. Okay.
So they fit into each other's receptor sites. So when you sleep for that 25 minutes or so, you eat up that adenosine and the caffeine's waiting right there. It comes in and blocks it. You're good for 4 hours.
And you're up. You're ready to go.
You're up and ready to roll.
So those 5-hour energies and those type of things we take,
right.
What do they do? How do they affect us?
So generally speaking, a lot of them are loaded with either caffeine, guarana, vitamin Bs, things like that. And so for some people, for example, there are some people that don't methylate vitamin B very well. Those could be pretty hazardous in many cases. And also I'm finding that a lot of people, they take 1 5-hour energy and then 2 hours later they take another. And then 2 hours later they take another. What they're trying to do is mask their need for sleep, right? And so because they're not necessarily like you who doesn't need a whole lot of sleep, you can't fool Mother Nature.
Right.
There's only so much you can kind of push yourself until your body is just going to give out and you need sleep.
How about things like kava?
So kava's interesting in general. There was actually a black box recommendation that came out about kava about 10 years ago for liver toxicity. So when people are taking something like kava, they have to be careful if they've got any liver disease or what's called a fatty liver, because it could actually be toxic. But there are some better herbal supplements out there. As a matter of fact, I have an herbal supplement that's going to be coming out pretty soon, and some of the different ingredients in it are not the things that you might expect. So of course there's things like GABA, which is a kind of the brakes of the brain, if you will. That's something that works well. Valerian is probably the most well-studied herb that's out there. But I've got some unusual things in there, like magnolia bark and jujube. Both of those are known to be anxiolytics, or things that bring your anxiety down, because a lot of times if you can't fall asleep, it's between your ears.
It's got to be difficult being an entrepreneur focusing on sleep. Because people they're in a stagnant position.
Right.
They don't know the outcome until they see it maybe months and years later.
Sure.
How do you make a business doing this?
How do I make a business doing this?
Yeah.
It's interesting. So I end up doing a tremendous amount of lectures. So I go to businesses and I'll teach people, okay, we can actually be more efficient. Actually, the book, The Power of When, I look at scheduling. I can actually teach people the perfect time of day when they're going to be most focused. I can show you the perfect time of day when you're going to be most creative. And I can tell you the perfect time of day when you should take a nap. And so I'll work with a company, come in, and we'll schedule meetings that way.
Okay.
So for example, if you've got a big advertising, marketing, art department, well, those people are not going to be very creative at 7 a.m. in the morning. But if you catch them at 4:30 in the afternoon based on their chronotype, we actually know they're going to perform better. So that's one of the things I do. I do a lot of lectures, I write books, and then I do consulting to consumer-facing companies that have a sleep-related product. Mattresses, pillows, cruise lines, hotels, you'd be surprised.
So this is a word that means something to you. You
Okay.
tell me how you would define it, okay? The word is timing. What's the word timing mean to you?
Timing is everything. Timing is incredibly important, and that's what this book is entirely about. It turns out that genetically, our bodies like to do things at certain times, but your body might be very different than mine. It's called a chronotype. Now, that might not be a word that anybody out there has heard about, but if you've ever been called an early bird or a night owl, those are chronotypes. So what I discovered is there aren't two, there's actually four. And so I have a quiz that you can take. It's free, it's online, people can go to it. And when you take the quiz, you fall into one of these four categories. Once you fall into one of these four categories, I now know your hormones because they're on a very predictable schedule. And I can tell you naturally when your hormones are at the right place. I can tell you the perfect time to have sex, eat a cheeseburger, walk your dog, ask your boss for a raise, you name it.
You need to know your boss's chronotype.
You do, and I can
Right,
teach you how to figure that out as well.
Wow, I love it. Again, people want to find out more, where do they go?
They can go to thesleepdoctor.com.
There you go. Dr. Michael Breus, thanks a lot.
Thank
We
you.
have a lot happening. That's disruptive right there. Make sure you take the time to sleep. Ken Rutkowski, that's Dr. Sleep, and we're here disrupting you. We'll be right back.